Hold on tight for the next hour. You're entering into a place, a zone called the alternative to the alternative media. It's a place, a special place where even truth seekers fear to tread.
All right, people, let's move like we've got a purpose.
Affirmative.
Okay, boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen, people of all races, colors, and creeds, welcome to the greatest show on earth, Investigative Journal. Greg Anthony here on this Monday. And boy, do I have a show for you today. It's a couple subjects that I always get in trouble over. One has to do with Pierre Plantard. You may not know who he is. I'll explain it all. And then if we even get to this point, Gamaliel's interview. You don't even know who Gamaliel is. Maybe you do. I didn't until I read the book, the Arco volume. And I didn't know who Pierre Plantard was until I tried to find him when I was working in Rome back in the 1980s, and I'll get into that story. But first, just a couple notes. This impeachment inquiry of Trump is just amazing to me. You know my feeling about it, my feeling that it's all theater, all staged, orchestrated. And, for example, the American political scene should be explained this way, the Hegelian dialectic, the left and the right, they work together. You pick your side, then you have chaos, and in the end they get their synthesis. My recommendation, don't pick a side. Understand how they operate. And the impeachment inquiry is a good example of it. There's really no crime he's committed. And the Democrats are basically saying to you, hell, we'll do anything we want without any evidence, without any due process. And that's because Trump is the representative of the American people. That is, if you're not woke, where did that come from? W-O-K-E. So if you're one of those people that are on the liberal side, boy, I'll tell you what, you don't want any facts. You don't want anything. You just can't stand these smelly Walmart shoppers, right? Cannot stand these deplorables, and how could they follow a guy like Trump? Well, let me tell you this. If you guys on the left haven't understood how this really operates and how the Vatican-led New World Jesuit Order are controlling you, then let me tell you something. You've got a lot to learn. That's why you come here to my show. You can listen all you want to Rush Limbaugh or to all of your pundits on the left on CNN, and you're never going to get to the truth at all because they're all working for the same master. Yeah. Now, the impeachment inquiry is a perfect example because I've never seen anything like it. They have a witness who they won't tell you who it is. He brought evidence that was hearsay evidence from second or third hand information. The people that are bringing the impeachment actually coached this guy. And, you know, the Republicans are sitting there twiddling their thumbs, and it's all orchestrated. In the end, you're going to have a socialist country. Just wait. It may not be this term. It may not be in 10 years, but it's on its way. And from there, you have your one world government, your one world order almost there. And you can thank the Pope in Rome for that. Okay, another thing before I get to Pierre Plantard, because you're probably wondering, who is this guy? Well, anyway, it's an interesting story. I promised to get in a lot of trouble over it. But before that, I just want to talk about DACA. Now, DACA is the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. The reason I want to mention it is the Supreme Court is looking at it today to see if it's legal. Well, how did DACA come into being? That means if you were a child that was from a different country, born in America, you can stay. How this happened was Obama passed an executive order in 2012. Then he reinforced it and widened it in 2014. When Trump came into office, he passed an executive order ending the program, and it's in the courts. So we're going to see what the Supreme Court has to say. It shouldn't even be there to begin with, because really, when you have a law like this passed by executive order, the people haven't heard or haven't been heard from. Now, Congress is the one who should be doing the laws. They won't do anything. And in this particular Congress, they can't do anything because the Democrats would say yes on DACA and the Republicans will say no in the Senate. So you'll have a stalemate. There's no compromise here, and it's really orchestrated because what'll happen is they're going to get their way in the end. Open borders. That's what's going to be. So just get used to it. Okay. Now, Pierre Plantard. How do I start something like this? It's really interesting, and I have to go back, I think, to where I first heard of this guy and how I heard about him. And I think you'll understand my interest then. Now, I probably should just forget about it and go on my merry way, but for some reason I can't. So let me go back. Well, when I was in Rome, now I guess it's going to be kind of a spiritual story and not just political. So I have to say, at the time I was an atheist. And so I was quite interested when I heard this name and how it came about. It came about through reading a newspaper article in I think it was the Corriere della Sera, or the La Repubblica in Rome. And it had to do with a group called the Priory di Sion, which was blackmailing Rome's, or the Vatican, stating that they were the protectors of the Merovingian, how do you pronounce that name? But the bloodline of Christ. And their headquarters were in France. And the master of this order was Pierre Plantard. So I did a little research because I was interested at the time. I had met the authors, at least one of them, I think was Michael Paget, I believe, wrote, remember the book Holy Blood, Holy Grail? And then he wrote the Masonic Legacy. I think the Holy Blood, Holy Grail was written in 1982, and then the Masonic Legacy in 1986. And really it talked about all of these things. The bloodline of Christ continued because he didn't die on the cross. So I was quite interested in it because I was an atheist, and I watched a lot of Catholics at the time up in arms over these stories that were appearing in these newspapers. So I happened to speak with a priest, a Vatican priest, about it, and he told me that this is normal. Every so often, this organization blackmails the Vatican, and they try to get money to shut them up, because if people start understanding what they're saying, they may stray away from the church and the story of Christ, which the Vatican believes, right? Or they tell you they do. So anyway, I asked him, is it true? And he said, you can never trust these people. And the people couldn't handle the truth. And I said, well, what the hell does that mean? So anyway, it made me, I was in that area of the world, so I said, maybe I should go find this guy. And so I set out to interview him. Let me leave it at that. That's how I got interested in it. So fast forward now to 2019, and I'm talking about it. Now, what happens is when I mention that there is a group like this out there that is professing that they hold the keys or the secrets of this bloodline, and they don't want it destroyed, so to speak, and they are the protectors of this. It gets Christians up in arms because it's a whole different story than they've heard regarding the life of Jesus. So to get in more trouble, I looked around and found this little article. It was quite interesting, by a man by the name of Huret Inyeto. And nobody knows where he is right now. So I read it, and I'll paraphrase it for you a little bit, because he suggested, that he did some research. And the research showed him that there exists today in France, a secret society that guards the lineal descendants of Christ. Furthermore, past leaders of this society are said to include some of the most illustrious names in European history. The Knights Templars were not wiped out in the 14th century, he uncovered, he said. But there's a secret sect with access to an esoteric tradition derived from the Templars, and these people have played a significant role in European politics and also American politics. And some believe they were behind the French and the American revolutions. Now, this secret society is called, the Priory de Sion. Now, let's go back to what that priest was telling me. He was suggesting it was all a hoax and that they were just using this to blackmail the Vatican to get money. But is it a hoax? Let's move forward, because when you look at this, I had an opportunity to talk with the guy who wrote the Holy Blood, Holy Grail, and also the Messianic Legacy. I should say that years later I found out he was the editor of the biggest Freemason magazine. So the question becomes, is it a hoax or isn't it a hoax? And we will not lay judgment to that right now. So the secret society was called the Priory de Sion, and their job, like I said, was to protect the descendants of Christ. So that means that if he had descendants, did he have kids prior to his crucifixion or after? Or didn't he have any children? So those are the three possibilities if we're just going to look at this, because it is out there. And it's easy to dismiss as a hoax if you're a Christian, but there's many people that aren't. So I thought it'd be interesting to look at it. I remember once I did this story years ago, and somebody, they got so mad at me and wanted to know what my religious beliefs were and how could I say things like this on a Christian station. And I said, why? What are you worried about? I mean, what is so bad about asking the questions? I'm not here to lead you away from your faith, and if your faith is strong, you have no worries anyway, right? So I said, just put up with me for an hour, and if you don't like it, just click off. So there's actually firm evidence that the Priory de Sion did exist in the past, according to this researcher. And he thinks it probably still does. And this goes all the way back to after Jerusalem, folks, fell to Godfrey de Bouillon, remember, in 1099. An abbey devoted to Notre Dame then was formed. This was du Mount Sion, was built on a hill of Zion south of Jerusalem. A man called Hughes Payan was the first Grand Master of the temple. So this was after the fall of Jerusalem under Godfrey's reign. Remember that story in 1099. And then researchers uncovered that this little sect was formed, and the first man that was the Grand Master, his name was Hughes Payan. Now, after some exhaustive research, here's where it gets interesting. The authors of the Holy Blood and Holy Grail, they uncovered a list of Grand Masters of this secret sect that stretched right to the 20th century. Some of the names are unexpected, to say the least. Some of those are listed below, which I have right in front of me. Now, it should be known that the research by these guys of these two books, as well as Remember Angels and Dan Brown's books, they were based on a lot of things that Pierre Plantard said. And we're going to get into who he really is. But some of these names of the Grand Masters started 1188, going down to 1963. And in there I see a couple names. Isaac Newton was one. let's see if another Leonardo da Vinci. Maybe you'd remember, let's see, Claude Debussy, and perhaps Victor Hugo. And then the last one, the last one that I remember seeing was Pierre Plantard from 1963 to 2000. He took over for Jean Conteau, C-O-C-T-E-A-U. Okay. So the question becomes, is this group both modern and realistic? Or is it a hoax? Under the auspices of an unqualified genius, superhuman illuminated initiates, and these grand masters being human beings, or are they basically holding something that is so powerful that we as normal human beings don't even understand? There's some information on some of the lesser known people, and I was interested in this because I usually, talk about Leonardo da Vinci and the rest, but there's some information on that, but I won't get into it. But the question becomes, like I said, is it a hoax or is it real? And that is something that I guess is above my pay grade. But let's look at who this guy, Pierre Plantard, was. Okay? Now, first of all, I made an attempt to go interview him and never got the opportunity. I went to what their office was. Back then, there was no internet or anything like that, so I tracked down their office, went to Paris, knocked on it, and they said it doesn't exist. I said, well, is Mr. Plantard here? He said, we don't know who he is. Okay, so obviously they didn't want to talk to anybody that they didn't have prior connections with. They did talk to the authors. He did talk supposedly to the author of the Holy Blood, Holy Grail, and he did talk to Dan Brown's research was based on that. So I guess he did give interviews, and I went back to Rome and I did a little bit of research, and I could not find out exactly who had planted these stories, where they came from, and I was left to asking around. And I was told by some people who said they knew that the Jesuits were very instrumental in planting this information in libraries, and they were instrumental in taking over after the Templars were supposedly disbanded. Okay, so the Jesuit order, when they came about in the 1500s, actually were the protectors of this bloodline, okay, or a part of them, okay, which wouldn't surprise me. So anyway, who's this guy, Pierre Plantard? And probably at this point you're fed up with the story, but I thought it'd be interesting just to look at who he was for the last few minutes. Well, he was born in 1920 in Paris, son of a butler and concierge, and left school at 17. Then he got involved with the church at St. Louis-Antibes, and from 1937 began this mystical, ultra-nationalistic associations with other people. Now, following the dissolution of the Grand Orient Freemasonry in Vichy, France, on August 13th, 1940, Plantard wrote a letter on December 16th, 1940, to Marshal Philippe Pétain, offering his services to the collaboration of the government, referring to a terrible Masonic and Jewish conspiracy. After 1941, Plantard wrote to the Paris prefect of police that his group, the French National Renewal, was to take possession of the unoccupied premises located at 22, wherever, which are currently let to an English Jew, Mr. Shapiro, who is presently fighting alongside his fellows in the British Armed Forces. By 1942, Plantard wanted to form another association, and his membership prohibited to Jews, but the occupying German authorities refused permission. So we are looking back on June 25th, 1956. Plantard legally registered in the town, one of the French towns, a new association called the Priory of Sion, based close to the French border near Geneva. The group was devoted to the support of building low-cost housing and criticizing local government through its circuit. The Sion in the name did not refer to the ancient land of Israel, but to a local mountain, Montagne de Sion, where the order, according to the statutes, intended to establish a retreat center. Okay. So, what we have is this idea that is this a hoax? Okay, is this a hoax regarding whether he is the protector of the bloodline of Christ? So, you can go read more of that, and apparently the documents and everything were given to the Holy Blood, Holy Grail people, as well as Dan Brown using it in his books, and then the movie, remember the movie Angels and Demons? So Plantard basically said he was protecting this bloodline. It had a rightful heir to the French throne, and that he was either of royal blood and the descendant of Christ, or protecting the bloodline. So that's basically a synopsis of him. So what about in the States? Has anybody ever said they were from the bloodline of Christ? I think her name's Kathleen McGowan, and she stated this in 2006, that she can prove, and I don't know if she went on to write a book or what she did, that she was also in the bloodline of Christ. Okay, so I don't want to hear people calling me going, Greg, why are you doing these things? I find it interesting because I'm an inquisitive sort, and I've always wondered whether I became whether you are a stout born-again Christian or not. You have to ask yourself, at least I would. What happened? Why in the Bible, and it's a simple question that most people usually write back and say I'm crazy for asking it. You don't know much about Jesus from the time he was young, a baby, and then until he was, 30, in his 30s. And so there's limited information between that period of time. And so one thing that struck me was knowing and researching a lot about the Roman Empire. They were meticulous back then on recording everything. And if there was a messianic threat, would they send somebody out to interview, to find him? And I said they had to, but how come there's nothing written about it? And the questions are still lingering out there. I found some explanation in a book called the Arco Volume, and I'll explain that in the second half hour. And then I started to wonder, maybe all this stuff years ago has to be in the Vatican archives, protected, and they don't want people to read it. And you'd have to ask yourself why. Well, one, the Vatican basically would be cutting its own foot off if it did, by stating, yes, we have the real information, so, all of their traditions would have to be changed, and it would undermine them. However, they could use this information to undermine Christianity and bring everyone under their flock, couldn't they? So it's an interesting question. They could use it for two reasons, for good or for bad. And if they have it, can they verify it? Is it a hoax? Back in 3 minutes on the Investigative Journal.
The book of Revelation says, the spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ. This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app. for all of your mobile devices. Streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy Reality News app. Get it now.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of Nicholas Arthur's new book titled When the Third Temple is Built. That's crosstheborder.org. When it comes to prophecy today, much of the evangelical Christian world has their eyes on Israel, waiting and watching to see when the third temple will begin to be built. The plans are drawn. The Jewish people are eager. Most evangelical Christians today believe that the rapture will happen before the third temple is built. Hi, I'm Michael Eugene. I was taught that Daniel's 70th week was in the future. Is that really what the Bible teaches? Have we searched the scriptures and found this to be true? Why is it so important for a re-established Israel to build a third temple in Jerusalem? Is it necessary to build a temple on the same location already occupied by the Dome of the Rock? Is it necessary for sacrifices to take place in the temple on Temple Mount? Is there really a rapture followed by 7 years of tribulation? What is the New Testament temple? Can we identify history and prophecy? Who is the first beast in Revelation chapter 13? Who are the 7 kings in Revelation 17? I have asked all these questions, and I have found Nicholas Arthur's new book, When the Third Temple is Built, answers all these questions and more using Scripture to interpret Scripture. The Bible says that no prophecy of Scripture is of any private interpretation. Nicholas shows us in his new book, When the Third Temple is Built, how the Bible interprets prophecy and not man's private interpretation. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of Nicholas Arthur's new book titled When the Third Temple is Built. That's crosstheborder.org.
The following program is labeled dangerous and off limits by the supreme Jesuit command. But stand tall, people. Listen up, and you may just learn something.
Oh, dear Lord Jesus, this ain't happening, man. This can't be happening, man. This isn't happening.
Okay, the Supreme Jesuit Command has given me the right to go on with this story. They love it. I mean, they really do. Greg Anthony here on the Investigative Journal, the greatest show on earth. Yes, because we get into these topics that really you don't hear very much anymore. You'll see an occasional story here and there. But it was pointed out to me, I was going to get into who Gamaliel is and the Arco volume. Let me go back a little bit, because it was pointed out to me at the break that I should be a little bit more specific about what was going on right after the conquest of Jerusalem in 1099, and then work my way towards Pierre Plantard, because I kind of give you a general overview. But let me start by saying I really made an attempt to meet him and to see if all this stuff was true. And I guess if I did meet him, he would say it would be. But it was funny that he didn't want to talk to somebody. Maybe he was only, getting out information that they were wanting him to get out. Maybe he was together working with the same organization. Maybe Dan Brown, maybe the people that wrote the Holy Blood and Holy Grail were all working together with the Jesuits to push this information out there, whether it was a hoax or not. And the question becomes, again, can anybody tell me the truth? Is it a hoax or isn't it? And then again, well, even if they did, can you believe it? So let's go back a little bit and look at this guy, Pierre Plantard, and the creation of the Priory, Priory de Sion, and look at it a little bit more specifically. In 1099, after the conquest of Jerusalem, Godfrey, or Godofredo de Bouillon, founded supposedly a mysterious order on the Abbey of Notre Dame du Mont Sion, which I'd mentioned. It would later be that the society would promote the creation of the Order of the Poor Knights of Christ, better known as the Templars. At least 5 of the 9 founders of the temple, researchers say, belonged in turn to the Order of Zion. And it could be said that in principle the temple was the armed arm of the previous one, or even that both orders were centralized in one, as it seems they shared the same master. It would be the case of André de Montbard, one of the original Knights Templars order, Templar order, who would become the maximum leader of it all. Okay? Now, the situation of fellowship would last about 60 years, they say, until 1188, after the Battle of Hattin. There was a schism between the two orders that produced its final separation. Okay? According to the Priory de Sion, the Order of Temple would be largely guilty of the loss of the Holy Land, and more specifically its master Gerard de Ridfort, whom the documents Priory accuse of treason. The situation would derive in that the Order of Zion would move to France without having ties to the temple. This rupture of relations was symbolized by the felling of an elm of 800 years in the city of Gisors. Interesting. From the moment on, the Order of Zion changed its name to that of Priory de Sion, and dedicated itself to its own objectives. The Priory's mission would be to protect a great secret related to the descendants of the Merovingian dynasty. Good, you pronounced it right, Greg. And restore in the monarchy of France with one of its members. His legitimate offspring, believed to be extinct, would have been demonstrated by scrolls discovered in the French village of Rennes-le-Château. There are traditions that give great importance to Mary Magdalene, who was told that after the crucifixion of Jesus arrives in Gaul, escorted by Joseph of Arimathea, and carrying the Holy Grail. Mary Magdalene would be the wife of Jesus, and when she traveled, she became pregnant and accompanied by her progeny. Naturally, heir to the term Holy Grail must be understood in the sense of holy blood, that is, as the physical offspring of Jesus, who moved to Gaul and continued there. So, when I heard that story in Rome in the 80s, that led me to look at all this stuff and, of course, read those books, Holy Blood, Holy Grail, and also the Messianic Legacy. It made me think about whether, asking as many questions as I could about what the heck really was the truth, and I could never really find out. Now, now somebody's going to say, Greg, why do you even care? Why do you want to find out? Good Christians will just have faith alone. And I say, okay, that's fine. But even if I was or was, let's say I was a staunch Christian, I would look into it anyway. And even if I wasn't. So it's really here or there when it comes to that. And I don't really think it's important. I think what's important is to search all avenues to see what people are doing. I mean, these people, if it is a hoax, are really undermining their own people, lying to their own flock. And so you're seeing this story play out. Now, if this is true, okay, the question becomes, why has it been hidden? Why doesn't everybody talk about it? It's an amazing story, and it makes me think about the real tragedy of huge religions, right? And what they do to people. But once in the present day, the Jewish lineage was married, this is what they say, to that of the Frankish kings, giving rise to the Merovingians. Now, around 500 AD, with the baptism and conversion of King Clovis, the Roman Church was established as the supreme spiritual authority of the West. One could say that it was a pact between Rome and the Merovingians, creating an alliance that should engender a new sacred Roman Empire. But it seems that the loyalty of the Franks to the Church was not very intense, since the Merovingians continued to maintain sympathy for the Arian religion they practiced before their conversion to Christianity. 200 years later, the Merovingian king Dagoberto II was murdered along with his family on behalf of his own palace butler, Peppino di Cedarstrom. The church, seeing this was endangering things, would have supported the conspiracy. With the death of Dagoberto and his descendants, the Merovingian dynasty came to an end, and that of the palace stewards began. The Carolingians, who had ecclesiastical support. But it could be the Merovingian dynasty did not end with Dagoberto II. Now, according to the Priory di Sion, the Merovingians, the lineage of Jesus, survived through a son of Dagobert, who would have been saved from the murder of his family. His name? Sigisberto IV, and among his descendants would be later Godfredo di Bouillon. Okay? So, we have a list again, I'm checking again. They give the same list of Grand Masters, the Priory, going from 1188 all the way down to our friend Thomas, Pierre Plantard, 1963 to 2000. Now there's another little name here, Thomas Plantard de St. Clair, since 1989. Change of his name. Okay. Thomas Plantard de St. Clair became Grand Master of the Priory di Sion under Article 14. These guys are serious. 14 of the Constitution of the Priory di Sion, that their titles fall in full line with one of the children who will be appointed by them without regard to sex. Under Article 16 of the different taxes and the titles of the Grand Master of the Priory di Sion may be transmitted as his successor in accordance with the same prerogatives. At the act dated July 6, 1989, Pierre Plantard de St. Clair, the Grand Master of Cars, informed the 121 teachers that in view of the favorable response of 107 votes in favor, 5 abstentions, and votes against accepting 9 of the succession of the proposed title and their prerogative, the ratification had been carried out, and on August 6, 1989 in Paris at 10 a.m. solar time, and that Thomas Plantard de St. Clair had been proclaimed the Grand Master. The information had been communicated to all members of the order. Pierre Plantard and the society. It's a bit confusing. Is he the same guy? Are you as confused as I am? Pierre Plantard, he was born in 1920, died February 3rd, 2000. Son of Pierre Plantard, like I said earlier, a butler, and his mother was a cook for wealthy families. And it gives a little bit of history that I went over before. And let's see if I could pick something out. Let's see. On May 50, 1956, we talked about him beginning to come into public eye regarding his position. But anyway, that's a little bit of the history of what we're looking at here as far as whether this is true or not. And that's up to you. And it's also up to you to just forget about it. And, sometimes I do. I hadn't brought this story up for a while and thought to myself, let's go look at it again. And I did. Okay, so you thought I was done with that. No. I just looked back in some of my notes and started to think back in 1981, or was it 82, regarding this whole story. And it brought me to this little note that I had, and I checked it out on the internet. And it's the book called The Sacred Enigma. It was written by Henry Lincoln, Bagent, Michael Bagent, the guys that wrote, and Richard Lay. They rewrote the legends of Rhenius and accepted the myth of the Priory and formulated the hypotheses that they presented in their book, which Dan Brown picked up. And this all is connected to Plantard as well. And I remember back then, when these books were coming out, and the Pope was killed back in 79, this guy Bagent and Lay, they came to do a story about that, and I guess they were researching a book. And so that's how I came into connections with these guys. But anyway, so they formulated this hypothesis that Jesus was married to Mary Magdalene and would have had offspring, and thus having Merovingians, and Pierre Plantard would have been his direct descendant, like I mentioned. Now, the French journalist Jean-Luc Chomil unmasked Plantard's deception, they said, in the 80s, and he proved that the secret dozers were fakes by Plantard and Philippe de Charis. Okay, so here we go. So we got Dan Brown, then we got these books out there, Holy Blood, Holy Grail, the Masonic Legacy, saying this, putting this story out there. Then we have the French journalist finding and unmasking Plantard, saying the whole thing's a deception. What does that prove? Absolutely nothing. Because, in a sense, it would be a Jesuitical thing to do, wouldn't it? Put out the information that it's true, then put out the information it's false, and let people fight over it for the rest of their lives, and in the end they'll get their way anyway. Now, if they put out the information that it's false, people can say, oh, see, it's just a hoax, and they can go, and on the other side of the coin, they can go on their merry way, protecting this information that may be true. So you have a question there. So you could believe the French journalist, or you could believe the people from the Holy Blood or Holy Grail, and Plantard, and in the end, it's going to lead you to the same conclusion if you're really looking at this thing, that you really don't know what the hell's going on. But you realize that this is definitely how the Hegelian dialectic works, even in this scenario that we're talking about. Just like we talked about it in DACA, like we talked about it in the impeachment, and like we can talk about it in most everything that goes on in Washington. So there you have it. Do I have any time? Yeah, I got a little bit of time here. So why don't we start off on this quest of, again, and I've done this before, but I always like looking back at it. And I don't think I explained it in this manner. One thing I did find out when I was living in Italy, and that was that the Romans, and I would check it out, there was a lot of guys that did research on this, that really were meticulous in what they did. So I asked the question, I said, well, if they were, why isn't there any record of the trials, of Jesus? The specific leading up to this, the interviews, the investigations, because they would, you could look at some of the information that was out there, and they would have hundreds and hundreds of pages on lesser criminals, so to speak, and threats to the Roman Empire. So I said, why has this been, why not? How come we can't find it? And somebody said, well, it's hidden in the Vatican archives. They know about it. And then I ran across this book called the Arco Volume, or the Archaeological Writings of the Sanhedrin and Talmuds of the Jews. And it's interesting. Before I even get into it, I am going to say that many people say, the book is true, here we go again, or it's a hoax. And it was written by a guy, he was a pastor, back before the time of the internet in the 1800s. When was it? Let's see if I can pick a date. 1856, 1857. And he was a pastor in the Midwest. And I don't have things in front of me here, and I've gone through the history of who wrote this book. And apparently a German scholar ended up at his church, and they began talking about this subject that we're talking about, okay? And it led him to a huge quest to get to Rome, to try to get into the Vatican archives, and then to try and uncover this question. Why don't we know more about what Christ was like during those years between the time he was young, a baby, and then returned to the scene before his crucifixion? He prefaces the book with saying this book was not intended to sway people one way or the other towards Christianity, and was not intended to be the final definitive, the final arbiter of what really happened. But he said this is how it happened. He communicated with this German scholar who said there is information regarding the Vatican having this many things about the life and times of Christ prior to his crucifixion. If he was crucified, they said the German scholar. And this led this pastor to take a boat, go to Italy, and he got into these archives and uncovered a number of things. One was, if you go through the book, I could go through chapter by chapter. And it's you uncover the Constantine's letter in regard to having 50 copies of the scriptures written, Jonathan's interview with the Bethlehem shepherds, and then the report of Caiaphas to the Sanhedrin concerning the execution of Christ, etc. But one of the chapters was Gamaliel's interview with Joseph and Mary and others concerning Jesus. So what he was saying was, yes, if the Romans were concerned, they did send somebody out, and they sent this guy named Gamaliel to find who this Messiah was. And so he had this translated, and he put it in this book. And let me read you a couple paragraphs, because I'm running out of time, and we can go into this again. But the question becomes, was this book, why don't you guys check it out, the Arco volume, it's ARCHKO, and tell me what you think, whether it's a hoax or not. But he does say in this, but I might add, outside of these tidbits of interviews and things like that, there weren't any great revelations regarding the bloodline of Christ and all the stuff that you're going to find in the last story we discussed. But it did lay some interesting facts regarding, if they are true, that would settle a little bit about who these, the story of Joseph and Mary and etc. But they sent this guy out, Gamaliel, and this was Gamaliel in the Holy Writings, found in the St. Sophia Mosque at Constantinople and sent to the Vatican archives, I guess. It seems Gamaliel was sent by the Sanhedrin to interrogate Joseph and Mary in regard to this child Jesus. And Gamaliel supposedly said, I found Joseph and Mary in the city of Mecca, in the land of Ammon and Moab, but I did not find Jesus. When I went to the place where I was told he was somewhere else, and thus I followed him from place to place until I despaired of finding him at all. Whether he knew that I was in search of him and did it to elude me, I cannot tell, though I think it most likely the former was the reason, for his mother says he is bashful and shuns company. Okay? Now that's an interesting statement. He was bashful, shuns company. Okay. How many times when I was a kid, growing up in Catholicism, I'd say, what What was he like when he was 12, like me? You know, people, you have these discussions in what we call catechism class. When you go to Catholic school, you go to catechism. We used to have it 1 hour a day, and a lot of these questions would come up by my fellow students as well. Did he play like we did? What did he do? And the priest would always say, those are the things those are the things unknown to man, and faith alone will guide you, etc., etc. So, he found out, supposedly, that he was a bashful kid and shunned company, liked to be a loner. Boy, I'll tell you, that doesn't sound good in today's world, does it? What do they do to people that are loners now? They automatically consider them what? Dangerous. Terrorists. Joseph is a woodworkman. He is very tall and ugly. His hair looks as though it might have been dark auburn when young. His eyes are gray and vicious. He is anything but prepossessing in his appearance. Possessing in his appearance, and he is as gross and glum as he looks. Interesting. He is but a poor talker, and it seems that yes and no are the depth of his mind. I am satisfied he is very disagreeable to his family. His children look very much like him, and upon the whole I should call them a third-rate family. Okay, so that's just the beginning of this Gamaliel adventure, and hope you enjoyed it. I know you're going to come back and say, God, what are you talking about? But back tomorrow on the Investigative Journal.
The book of Revelation says, the spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ. This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today, so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy.
Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity. Invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host Melody Cedarstrom right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free 1-800-375-4188.